Hello and welcome to Open Minds UFO Radio. I'm your host, Alejandro Rojas, and I have with me Martin, the Super Duper Willis.
Hello. Super duper. Wow.
That's cute.
I always want to do that ho thing. I forget who used to do that. Yeah.
I think that you've done it a couple times on various levels, but that was like your most all in.
I was all in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It sounded like you even directed your voice off mic because it was just going to be such a large.
Yeah. Wow, you're very observant.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's what I did.
Well, it was great.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that. So,
all right.
I have an extremely exciting show today. Now, I got to let people know the audio is a little and it's not like this right here because, and you'll attest to this, my guest is George Knapp, who is very, very difficult to get.
Yes, I can attest.
Yeah, and so it's just that he's a really, really busy guy. And so we batted around sometimes, and in fact, even though I talk to him periodically via email, it's quick hits of information back and forth, and I rarely ever hit him up for stuff like this because I know he's too busy. But they're promoting the new Skinwalker documentary, and I know he wanted to do this, so we were able to figure out a time, but it was while I was in the middle of stuff at the Devil's Tower UFO Rendezvous this past weekend. So I had to kind of go excuse myself, run out, find a little spot in the corner, give him a call, do this interview via my phone, and it's a phone recording, so both of us sound like we're on a phone. But the content of this interview is friggin' amazing. I learned so much. He was opening up and sharing more details than I've ever heard him share before. And you'll hear, and I think people listening will even be like, wow, I can't believe he's sharing this stuff. Because usually he's very careful with information. Not that he's not careful here, but he really opened up, which was great. So this is one of my all-time favorite interviews ever, actually.
I bet. I've wanted, like you mentioned, how hard he is to get, and he is gracious enough to at least reply when I write him. Mm-hmm. But he's just super busy. He just said, I'm already working 60 hours a week. I just don't know if I can do it, and get back to me in the fall. Well, that's been 3 years now.
Wow.
He'll say, get back to me in so many months. And I put it on my calendar and get back to him, but he's just a busy guy. Yeah. So I got to say, I'm just a little bit jealous, I have to say.
Yeah, well, I've been jealous of your guests, so we get to bat that back and forth and be jealous of each other. Because you got Steve Justice, right? Wasn't it? Oh, it wasn't Steve Justice. Who was it? No. It was another one of those guys. I can't remember.
Oh, you're talking about Mellon? Chris Mellon?
Oh, yes, you got Chris Mellon. Yeah, that was a real good one. Who, of course, is part of To the Stars Academy. And there's this whole government paranormal investigation aspect to Skinwalker. And really, the guy who is releasing the best up-to-date information on this whole government UFO / paranormal program is George Knapp. So that's why this interview is so important as well, because we do discuss quite a bit about the government involvement with Skinwalker and how it all started. And you'll hear in the interview, I don't want to give any spoilers yet, that it's really remarkable what happened and how Harry Reid first got involved with Bigelow, and then how, all of them got involved with the Skinwalker and then government program. So really important information here. And I think it's new information that hasn't been revealed yet as far as the entire timeline. So very exciting.
Now, let me ask you this: when George co-wrote that book, did he at that time know that the government had involvement, but he couldn't talk about it?
I believe so. Yes, and we discussed that. We discussed how he had information that he vouched not to release until the given time, and he didn't, and the importance of his, maintaining his credibility, and why he held a lot of this information back. So we'll hear about that. And of course, it is important for a journalist. Often, even myself, especially in the entertainment world, am given interviews or information and asked to embargo that information until a given time whenever, their marketing strategy is to have some sort of information released. And so it's something that journalism do. That's how you gain integrity. And, George Knapp, just to speak about him a bit for those who are not aware of his entire history, he's an award-winning journalist. And by that, I mean he's gotten something like over a dozen Emmys. He's won a
Amazing.
Peabody, an Edward R. Murrow Award. He's done... for decades, stories on the paranormal and UFOs. He really is responsible for putting Area 51 on the map. KLAS in Las Vegas, the station he works for, has been reporting on Area 51. I think, I've done a few stories on this since the get-go. They by far were on top of Area 51. But nobody really knew about Area 51, and it certainly wasn't a household name until the late 80s when George started interviewing Bob Lazar, who alleged to work at Area 51. Of course, that story went gangbusters, and now everybody knows Area 51. At the time that I took the Kardashians to Area 51, it was both the most famous and the most secret base, unacknowledged at the time, at the same time, which is so weird. And then actually later that year, 2013, they finally admitted to Area 51's existence. So,
now let me ask you this: does the government have another name for it, and it's us that's on the outside calling it Area 51?
Yes, there are. But what in particular, I think it's essentially just the proving grounds. But what actual name they use, it's not for sure. But there are different areas on this proving ground, and the main area where this base is Area 51. That's why it's called Area 51. So that is an official designation, essentially.
Right. Now, when Bob Lazar was talking about it way back when, the SR4, do I have that right? S4. Did he actually mention that ahead of that coming out as well?
Yeah, he did mention that he worked at a secret underground facility outside of Papoose Lake, which is actually south of Area 51, in a section he called S4, which is kind of an issue because there are different sections and there are S sections. But now that we have official maps of the area, S4 is not where Bob Lazar said it was. And the roads he said he allegedly drove on to get out there are not visible on any maps or even on satellite imagery. So I don't know. For me, that's kind of an issue as well. Yeah. But George really feels, there's, although he feels there's some information that does not hold up, such as Lazar's educational background, that there is a lot that does hold up, and he says he even has insiders who can verify more who do not want to go on the record. George Knapp is one of my favorite journalists in the world. He's just a very good journalist, really good at putting information together, and very credible. So
yes.
And many people feel that way. So another couple things, I do have a couple interviews. So I think I mentioned this before, but Den of Geek is finally released there. So last weekend I was able to go to a special private screening, and George and I talk about this a bit in Las Vegas of the Hunt for the Skinwalker documentary that just came out last week. And Den of Geek finally just posted those videos that I did of George and Jeremy, and an article I wrote on all of it. But on the video, at least which one, the Jeremy one, For Open Minds, the video I did for Open Minds of my interview of Jeremy at that, I also did a little pro tip for ufologists. And you can watch the video because I'm there at McCarran Airport in Vegas, and I was just telling people essentially where you can go to take pictures and of the Janet airplanes, the unmarked airplanes that take people to Area 51.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and I have a couple of my pictures of them in that video as well.
Don't they take a bus to get there to the airplane?
I think they do take buses, but for the most part, they fly. Oh, a bus to the airplane? No,
Yeah,
I think they
something like
drive.
Oh, okay. I thought I saw a clip where there were buses, and then they would get off and get on the unmarked airplane or something.
Yeah, maybe. I thought they drove to the airport, but maybe not.
Yeah, probably though.
So
That
on
would
my
make more sense.
Patreon site that I've talked to you about, if you go look Alejandro on Patreon, I have links to all of these. And one more thing before we move on. I was at this Devil Tower UFO Rendezvous this past weekend with, Mark D'Antonio, Karen, David Marler, Lee Spiegel, Richard Beckwith, Micah Hanks, KGRA was there with Riggs Hobbs and all the guys, and then Chris O'Brien was a speaker as well. And so I have a couple behind the scenes videos that I did on my Facebook Live or on the Open Minds Facebook Live. You can also find links to those on the Patreon. And so those are a lot of fun. They're just us being goofballs as usual. And also part of the panel that was going on during the first night. And I also have videos that I recorded. These are really cool. They turned out really nice, so I can't wait to get these out. But up where we're staying, we have this beautiful view of the Devil's Tower. So I got interviews of most of the speakers with the tower in the background.
Wow.
So they look really cool, and we talk about Close Encounters of the Third Kind, the movie that made Devil's Tower, really famous for UFOs and aliens. And then we also talk about kind of modern ufology and how things are going right now.
Are there a lot of other rock formations similar to that in that area?
No.
Really?
Not
So
at
it
all.
really stands out.
It
Wow.
does. It really stands out. It's strange. It's odd. It's very different than everything else in the area, so it's really cool. And essentially a big volcano is responsible, which makes sense. I mean, areas where there are very large volcanoes, there's typically no other very large volcano next to it, especially in the United States or in the continental United States. Hawaii, of course, is tons of volcanoes all over, but so that explains why it's so strange sitting there all by itself. But yeah, I'll maybe post some close-up pictures and stuff. I know I did last year. You can find on my Facebook, but it is something to visit. It is really something to see. I recommend everybody see it. And if you do go see it, you can stay in Hewlett at the Best Western there, where they hold the UFO Rendezvous and talk UFOs with the owners there. And it's a beautiful place, beautiful town, Hewlett.
Wow. Amazing.
Yep, very cool. So that's everything that we'll be talking about. That is getting everybody up to speed on what we've been up to at Open Minds. But I guess let's go ahead and talk some UFO news.
Well, this story... This story is the reason I think this is kind of interesting on space.com, great website, and a lot of space news on there all the time, ranging from the rover to you name it, anything going on in astronomy and astrophysics. Great website. Well, they're talking about a movie now. I just watched the trailer, and I can't wait to watch it. It's downloadable now. The simple name of the movie is called UFO. That's it. So what space.com is talking about about this movie is, it says UFO movie delves into the math of the universe navigation. And so they show the trailer, of course. And in the movie, it's Gillian Anderson, of course, from the X-Files. And she stars as a mathematics professor. and the other lead is Alex Sharp as a college student, and he has a UFO sighting as a child, and it kind of goes through. Everyone is at an airport, I believe. I really suggest to watch the trailer, and you'll get hooked too, because I can't wait to watch it. So he has a sighting, and basically what he does is he figures out some math and figures out that they're coming back. But the math really has a lot to it. Basically, space.com says the fine structure constant relates to the strength of the electromagnetic force between elementary particles. Research has at times suggested that this constant might vary across the universe, so space travelers could use it to triangulate their location. The characters discuss how they do this, and the process could work similarly to a pulsar navigation, how that would work. And in the method, the navigators would observe the regular pulsing neutron stars to figure out their own locations. Anyway, it's all due to math. I know that's kind of a little geeky there, but it's all has to do with math, which kind of explains it out in the movie. And it's a thriller too. And again, just watch the clip. It's from Sony Pictures, and you watch the clip. The government's involved. They're hiding. They're wondering. The college kid's wondering why the government is still there after they have this sighting, and they just called it a drone. So why is all the government agents still there? And that's what really got him into researching what was going on. Anyway, I can't wait to watch it, and it looks like a really good movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that I haven't heard a lot about it. I haven't even watched a trailer. I mean, I've seen that Gillian Anderson's in it, and I've read about the movie, so it looks really cool so far, even though I haven't watched the trailer and stuff. But and then I know Ryan Sprague interviewed somebody involved with the movie, I think. But
oh, really? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's cool to hear more about it from you.
Yeah.
So let's see, what else news? One thing that people kept asking about is this solar observatory stuff. And, it's a little frustrating. And I told people this on the live stream that I was doing, and I'll say it again. It's just that, people, and I know a lot of listeners already understand this, but whenever something odd in the world happens, which is nearly every day, there are many people who jump on this UFO connection type of thing. And, especially the people making a bunch of money, the biggest charlatans, to put it quite frankly, jump on it immediately. And then they start doing Facebook Live and YouTube Live videos with all these wild, ridiculous claims. And I don't understand why they have such huge audiences when they're proven wrong pretty much every single time. But I guess they spin it in a manner in which they they're just not telling you the truth type of stuff. But
so could you tell exactly what happened that they were spinning?
Yeah, essentially what happened, which is true. I mean, it was genuinely a mysterious event in that the FBI came in. They
yes, now I know what you're talking about.
Yep.
Yeah.
They asked everybody to leave. A nearby post office, they also had people leave, and so they evacuated these two places.
And a few residents too, right?
I'm not sure about residents.
I think I saw that. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so maybe, and that would make sense because of what I'm getting into. And at the time, and this was in New Mexico, at the time, even the sheriff was getting upset because he's like, they're not telling us what the hell's going on here. What it turns out it was a security issue. They've let people back, and they haven't given all the details yet, but it looks like there were threats. So it was either a bomb threat for the observatory and or the post office, and that's why they evacuated people, for their protection.
Wow.
So, and then people have gone out and said, oh, look, there's 6 or 7 other cameras that are down. Well, you know what? There are thousands, literally thousands of live webcams at observatories around the world. In fact, our great friend Mark D'Antonio, who was there at the Devil's Tower, he does his own live stream videos from his, observatory that he's got in his backyard. So it's easy to go find some that are not working or down at the time. And he and others have made a great point that if this had anything to do with a UFO event, that you wouldn't take down one observatory because all the observatories can observe the same thing. In fact, Mark made a really good point that if something were to really happen, what they would do is send an agent or two and essentially tell them, okay, well, let's tell people there is a prosaic answer to this mysterious, anomalous information you found. Not close anything down, but then move on, and nobody would know the wiser. So, for instance, let's say they got a video of some large craft near the sun, or they caught something on their telescope. The best thing for the FBI to do, or anybody who wanted to squash this, would come in and say, okay, here's what we're going to tell the public, that it was just something prosaic, and then and you'll funnel the rest of the information you get on this to us privately. Mm-hmm. Which makes sense, because everybody would say, oh, okay, they know what it is, and move on, and it wouldn't be but closing down everything, just makes everybody think that there's some kind of. But the local observatory and stuff had some funny quotes. Let's see, where is it? This one's kind of cool. He said, the university professor who leads operations at the telescope says, it was the first time I've had to deny contact with aliens and death by solar storm and underground tunnels and new communications via X-rays all at one time. So not only did the UFO people, but the people, who think the world's going to end and a bunch of other conspiracy people had all kinds of conspiracy theories related to it.
Wow, something, huh?
Yeah, funny stuff. So, yeah, I wouldn't worry about the observatory, but I would worry about these people who, as soon as something happens, are saying that they have all this inside information, that there's some kind of...
Yeah, I'm kind of curious to know who that is, but of course we won't mention names. But
And, people like George Knapp, I know even, and others took note, and it's like, wow, this is kind of weird. We need to look into this. And that's kind of the right attitude, saying, hey, this is kind of weird. We need to look into it. And then look into it to discover what's going on, as opposed to making bombastic claims right off the bat.
Yeah. Yes, craziness.
I guess, well, we've got a couple of minutes. Let's see what else was out there. As far as news, I know that solar array thing was creating a lot of concern for people. But otherwise, I guess just the Skinwalker movie is now out, and what's great is it's getting a lot of publicity, and what I like about it, some people are complaining, oh, there's nothing new in it. Well, I would argue that there's new stuff that I had seen that I was not aware of, and I doubt there's not many have done more interviews with these guys than I have on this topic, so I don't know where these people are, how they already knew about some of this. But even if that is the case, we haven't seen pictures and videos of where all this stuff took place to the extent of what's in the movie. And even if it's sharing what we do already know in this new format, that's important because it's getting to a new group of people.
That's right. I like, I watched the movie, and I like the part where George is put on a chair like 200 or 300 yards away from everyone else in the middle of the night in the dark. And he says, I was on the edge of my seat.
Yeah, we talk about that a little.
Yeah.
So we cover that a little bit in this interview, but yeah, it's covered in the documentary, but that is great how they used him for bait to
they did, yeah.
Lure some paranormal.
Funny.
That
and
is
nothing,
really cool.
Well, no, I don't want to do a spoiler alert. Never mind.
And I'm sure, at least your opinion, did you learn something new?
Well, like you said, it was really good to see the ranch. I read the book, and then you get to actually see the physical ranch where things took place. So I just think it was, just for me, that was worth it, to watch the movie.
But I mean, you didn't know they used George Knapp for bait.
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so there are a few other stories like that I didn't know either. So it's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So check it out. But we'll be talking to George right after this break. But before we do, I want to thank you, Martin, for joining us once again.
You're very welcome. Always.
we've got more coming up with George Knapp right after this break. If you're listening on KGRA, you'll see some commercials. Please patronize some of these people to help KGRA stay on the air. And then for those of you listening to the podcast, you'll hear a short musical interlude. We'll be right back with George Knapp.
Welcome back to Open Minds UFO Radio. I'm your host, Alejandro Rojas, and I am here with George Knapp. Thank you so much for joining us.
Always good to talk to you, Alejandro, and it was great to see you at our little secret soiree in Las Vegas last weekend. You're a traveling guy.
I am all over the place, but when Jeremy let me know that you all were going to be screening the film, there was no way I was going to miss that, and especially to see you all who were there, which was a lot of fun.
Well, it was an interesting crowd. You'd have to admit there were some interesting faces in the mix.
Yeah, definitely. Some of whom names we can't share, but that makes it even more fun and intriguing for the audience, I think.
That's okay. You can say. Well, there's one you can't say, but we'll get into that. Yeah, we'll talk about that. So, I guess to begin with is the fact that really this documentary was the format you wanted to share information about the ranch with in the first place. That's true. I mean, I started shooting video at the ranch late 90s. Of course, I learned about the ranch around the time the rest of the world did in 1996. There were a couple of newspaper articles that came out about the weird happenings at the property, mostly focused on UFO activity. And, of course, the Uinta Basin already had a reputation well-earned as being a UFO hotspot for as long as people have lived there. So when Bob Bigelow and his team went to the ranch, bought the place, set up shop, installed detection equipment and cameras and a team of scientists on the property, I got to learn little bits and pieces about what was going on, under the condition that I not talk about it until they gave me the okay to go forward. In sort of around 1999, I finally got my first visit to the property and then started going back periodically with photographers. Matt Adams has been my most frequent collaborator on the property, and we were shooting video for what I hoped would one day be a documentary project, maybe more than one. After a couple of years of making these visits, though, Bob Bigelow was concerned. He sort of changed his mind about the direction I was taking. He was concerned that if we came out with a film, the place might be overrun by UFO enthusiasts and other kinds of paranormal researchers. And in fact, it turned out he was right. So I put the documentary on hold, at least in plans of any kind of distribution. But I continued to visit the property over the years, a couple times a year, at least once a year, and would always bring a photographer and record what I could. And when we couldn't go on the ranch itself, which in particular during the bass period, which we will talk about, I would interview other people in the basin, talk to witnesses, got to know some of the Utes and some of the longtime residents, and continued to collect information. And I didn't know if it would ever come out. I really didn't know if it would ever bear fruit because, once Bob Bigelow gave me the okay, Colum and I, to come out with a book, there was no turning back. I mean, we did our best. We used different names for the rancher family because NIDS had made that promise to them. We didn't identify the location. We didn't use any photos. But, of course, people figured it out and started flocking to the property anyway. And it caused a lot of problems. I think Mr. Bigelow regretted ever allowing the book to go forward. In fact, I know he did. And, again, I still had made the promise to him that I wouldn't go forward with the footage. And so I didn't. There were tiny little bits of it that I used in public presentations a couple of times, but that was it. Little tiny slivers. And then when the property was sold in 2016, it occurred to me, maybe, I don't want to cause problems for the new owner, but maybe there's a chance that I could move forward with this. And the new owner said yes, and Jeremy Corbell had been bugging me about it. And I see your Skinwalker stuff, and so that's how it came together.
Mm-hmm. When it came to the book was a pretty big hit. I mean, it sold well. It got the word about Skinwalker out there. Were you all, including Bigelow, maybe not expecting the book to be as popular as it was?
No, I thought it would be pretty popular because it carved a new niche in the field. You know, there was no place quite like it. And there certainly has never been a study quite like that. I mean, it is the most intensively studied paranormal hotspot ever. You never had a team of scientists on the ground, boots on the ground, doing that kind of research. Now, I know there are a lot of criticisms of the study, and justifiably so, but there is no template for it. There's no, sort of a guidebook to follow for something like this because there just aren't any places like it. You know, Hessdalen is a long-standing study, but it's mostly looking at lights in the sky, not the kinds of things that the NIDS team had to deal with. So, I think that Mr. Bigelow probably regrets ever allowing it to go forward, but I knew it would be a hit. And a hit is a relative term because that book, although it sold well compared to other paranormal books, it never really pierced the veil into the larger public. And that's what we were hoping to do with the film, is to attract a larger audience beyond the UFO paranormal field to, even if it seems sort of rudimentary, to bring people along step by step on how this story unfolded. We wanted to try to appeal to a much broader audience.
I wonder, it sounds like you really sympathize with Bob Bigelow's, concerns with people coming to the ranch. However, you're a journalist, and I'm sure that you're also, you have this compulsion to share information. So how did you feel about it? You probably understood his concern, but at the same time, of course, wanted to share information.
Well, first and foremost, I made a promise to him. I mean, I know there are other journalists who operate differently, but look, this was a long-term study. There was no hurry. There was no reason to sprint. Of course I wanted to tell the story, and I would bug him and bug Column about it periodically ever since I started learning what was going on there, and saying, look, we need to tell the world about this. Eventually, Bob came to the conclusion himself, and I think at the urging of Column, that after a period where this activity went underground, this Skinwalker, whatever you want to call it, this intelligence that's there, it didn't want to be hunted, and it made its intentions very clear in very dramatic ways, and it just took its ball and wanted to go home. And when that happened, my arguments that maybe the world should know about it became more persuasive, and Bob Bigelow figured, look, if I let you tell some of the story, maybe people will come forward with other hotspots that we could go study. So I wrote a series of newspaper articles in 2003, which means I kept my word for those 7 years, didn't say anything to anyone about Skinwalker. And then I did a couple of newspaper articles, and bam, they went all over the world. And after that, it became a little easier. The cat was out of the bag. It became easier to convince Bob to let us do the book, again, without any photos and specific information about the location, and without really identifying the ranch family either. And so the book came out. And of course, he was right, though. I mean, as soon as the book came out, the place was overrun. I mean, not just the locals who would go out there on Friday night and take their girlfriend and have a little scare fest, or the UFO hunters who would really get obnoxious and go up to the property in the middle of the night, flash bulbs into the windows of the house, or the vandals who would rip off the fence posts and steal things, or others who would go out there and have beer parties or whatever, really caused some problems. And I remember being with Bob, having a conversation about that, and I said, look, I'll volunteer. I'll go there. I'll camp out. I'll chase people away. I'll be security. And he said, no, we'll do something else. So we flew on his jet. We took his chief of security, went out there on a particular weekend, and he had a bunch of equipment on me, and I was in this camo gear and had a 1,000,000 candle power spotlight, and I was stationed at the front gate, and his security guy was positioned at the back gate. And we were chasing people off. And I wasn't there 10 minutes at the front gate when the first truck full of people came up. And I thought they saw me sitting in the bushes in this lawn chair. I thought they had noticed me. So I jumped up. They were coasting down the road. They turned off their lights and turned off the engine, just coasted right up to the gate. I jumped out with this 1,000,000 candle power spotlight and turned it on. And man, you could hear them shriek. They fire up this truck and peel up backwards down the road. And I figure by the time that story gets told online, it'll be a 9-foot-tall Bigfoot with a laser beam attacking off the ramp.
Right, it'll be Gort, like a big alien from...
Yeah.
That's really funny.
But after that, Bob could see he had a problem, so that was when he started to have round-the-clock security, and he had teams from Bigelow Aerospace who would rotate in and out for 10-day shifts. And a lot of those guys, if not most of those guys, had their own dramatic experiences, and some of them, as tough as they are, ex-cops, ex-commando, ex-military police, that kind of people, they wouldn't go back. No, they wouldn't go back.
So, and one of the reasons I'm curious about this is because I kind of put myself in your shoes. If I was in that situation, would I feel guilty? And I wonder if you did at all. Now, personally, I feel like getting the information out is so important that it would justify it in my mind. Did you have a tinge of guilt?
A little bit, but I'll have to admit to something even worse, is that I got a little vicarious thrill out of being able to know stuff that nobody else knew.
Oh, yeah.
It, of course, I'm sure you've had this mental conversation with yourself, Alejandro. What if somebody came to you and said, we'll let you in, but you can't tell anybody? You know, that's a tough decision to make. Now, I didn't have that kind of an agreement. My agreement was I couldn't tell anybody until they gave me the green light. These were people that I had known for a long time, that I trusted, and I wanted them to trust me, and I wanted it to get around that other people can trust me. I'm in the information business. I want people in that particular field and others who work on those topics and in sensitive positions to feel that they could trust me. And it's worked out pretty well. I mean, it's worked out pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the same, and I think that's why I get let in on a lot of things, because I'm, of course, very careful about sharing information when they ask me not to. But I think you'll find this interesting, is that the only time I've been in this situation was with MUFON, with the Bigelow Project, because they asked us to sign non-disclosures, and at the time I was representing MUFON as far as PR. So I said no. I said it's better, I feel, for myself if I don't know. Because then if you don't tell me what I'm not supposed to share, I won't accidentally share it if somebody's asking me questions. And little did I know, likely, this was during the time that Bigelow was working with the government, doing investigations.
Yeah. I know how you feel. I mean, it's, as journalists, we have to, sort of figure out whether we're crossing a line. I never felt I crossed the line, because the promise I had made, I kept, and I never revealed information. I knew someday I'd be able to report it, and I wasn't in a hurry because this was a long-term study, a long-term project, and because they didn't have any conclusions. There was no impending timeline, no critical point at which we needed to go forward with something. And Bigelow kept his word. When he finally gave me the green light, I was allowed to report it all. There was no restriction that I couldn't report anything about NIDS. Now, it becomes more complicated a little bit later, but I'm sure we're going to get into that.
Yes, we will. Before we get into that, though, another fun story that you told us the other day was how you were used as bait. That you didn't have your own experiences, but you were put in a situation where you possibly could have. So I was wondering if you could share that story.
That would have been 1991, I think. So it was the first time I went to the ranch with a photographer to start shooting on the documentary. And so I'd been hearing about the property for 5 or 6 years at that point, about the kinds of experiences that had happened both to the rancher family and to the NIDS personnel who've been on the ranch for a long time by that point. And there was some spooky stuff. Now, UFOs, wow, yeah, I'd love to see a UFO. The orbs that they were talking about, yep, would love to see those. I'm not really crazy about seeing a cattle mutilated in front of me. There was a story about a giant cloud, a dark cloud that sort of took over the mind of a physicist, and we can get into that a little bit later, and that was kind of spooky. The 8-foot-tall, 9-foot-tall creature that crawled out of the wormhole-looking tunnel, that was kind of spooky. And then in the middle homestead, which is where most of the really weirdest and most disturbing stuff happened, there had been a visitor to the property when the rancher family, the Gormans will call them, had still been there before NIDS was there, and he said he was drawn to the property, big Grizzly Adams type dude, drawn to the property, didn't know what it was, he wanted to meditate, and the rancher let him out into the pasture. He and his son said, all right, fine, you can spend a couple of minutes, we'll take you out in the middle homestead. And they went off to the side and kind of kept an eye on the guy, chuckling to themselves. And he was there in the field for a couple of minutes, his head to the sky, his eyes closed, his arms lifted up, and his palms to the sky as well. And they hear this cowbell, off in the distance, and the rancher realizes, hey, you know what? I don't have any cowbells on my cows. And then they see this thing moving through the trees. It's like Predator, like in the movie Predator, a camouflage, opaque sort of a critter, large, moving through the trees. It comes out of the trees. It goes right at this Grizzly Adams dude. The rancher's just about to warn him that something was happening, and this creature gets right up to the guy and roars. And it's a roar like a lion roar. You can hear it a mile away. This guy just about craps his pants. He jumps backwards, falls on the ground. This thing, whatever it was, in camo mode, goes back into the trees and disappears. And the rancher comes rushing over, and the guy was petrified. The rancher had to pry himself off this guy. They let him off at the front gate, and he left screaming, yelling, "This is Satan, it's the devil, it's evil." And they kind of laughed about it, except they didn't know what that creature was. Well, that is the spot where they took me to be used as bait. So we're out there the first night that I had spent on the property, and we tried to do all the things that had historically attracted the attention of whatever it is. The arrival of strangers would be one thing that would do it. We made our presence known in multiple ways. We built a fire out on the middle homestead and did interviews and made a bunch of noise, made our presence obvious, and then we dug in the ground. We got an earth mover and dug in the ground just to move things around, because that had been the most effective way to get the attention of whatever is there, at least during the time that NIDS was there. So we did all that stuff, and then Colin says, I got an idea. Let's put you on a chair in the middle homestead, and we'll leave you there and see what happens. So they hooked up like a microphone and a Geiger counter and a couple of other things, put me on this little white plastic chair in the middle homestead where the Predator thing had come out, where the black cloud creature had come out, and they left me there and went a couple hundred yards away with cameras and telephoto lenses to watch to see if something came to get me. And I told the story in the film that, I was trying to be brave and everything, but I couldn't quite get it out of my head that there was some bad stuff that had happened out there. And, I don't mind seeing UFOs, a couple of other things, but I really didn't want to run into Predator and have it roar at me like that. But nothing came to get me other than mosquitoes. However, a lot of people haven't been so lucky. I think it is an interactive quality. We can get into this later if you want, but whatever it is that's there, it kind of sizes you up. The people who've had the worst experiences are those who've had a very cavalier attitude or defiant attitude or confrontational. The people who bring guns, for example, and are going to take this on, I'm not afraid of anything, that commando, a gung-ho kind of attitude, those are the ones who've really, really had some bad experiences that extend beyond the ranch. So yeah, I was bait. I didn't like it, and I don't really want to do it again.
That's interesting what you said just there about how the attitude may have an effect. What was your attitude? I guess, what was your mindset as you went through this? Do you think you maybe had more of a respect for what happened, what was taking place?
Absolutely. I mean, Colin had prepared me. He had told me that he always makes mental preparations when he's going to the ranch. He would always do it, even though when he was going there all the time, is that he sort of girds his loins in a mental sense, is that it is a respectful attitude. We're here to learn kind of a thing. You show us what you got if you want to show it to us, but I'm not going to push the idea. Now, the result for me has been I've never seen anything. I mean, I never seen anything dramatic anyway. I've seen some lights on one of the trips that Jeremy and Matt Adams and I made in the middle homestead that we couldn't really explain. They weren't natural, not a natural source that we know of, and not electronic in any way. It's not gear that was there. And, there's some other tiny little things that have happened during my visits, but nothing anywhere close to the kinds of things that we described in the book. So I don't know why that is. It frustrates me greatly because I don't know of anyone else who's gone as many times as I have who has not seen something or has not had an experience, but I haven't. I hope that I have conveyed to whatever it is that I am respectful, and maybe it'll show me at some point when I'm worthy. But I'm kind of glad that some of the things that have happened to other people have not happened to me. And yeah, the people who have gone in with a bad attitude are the ones who've had the worst experiences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do want to get into, because like you said, we all interested in this field want to experience something or see that. What we're looking into is a real phenomena. But like you said, some of this is kind of scary, and I was wondering if you could share the story of the black cloud that, affected the researcher?
That was, I don't have the exact date in front of me. I think it was 97, when Colin Kelleher and another of the NID staffers, a PhD guy, a brilliant guy, are walking again with Middle Homestead. They had 2 dogs with them. They would use dogs as sort of biosensors. The dogs would often give them advance warning when something weird was going on, that they either smelled or sensed or could see in the dark. And they're walking in the Middle Homestead, and suddenly both of the dogs go behind the legs of the 2 researchers who are walking through the field. And they're huddling there and kind of shaking. They're scared by something. And these 2 scientists look up in the trees, and one of them notices what looks like a black cloud moving at the treetop level, and it starts getting bigger and bigger. And it gets into the middle of the trees right in front of them. And suddenly the one scientist, the second scientist, is frozen. And out of him comes a voice, and it's not his voice, and it's speaking. I'm trying to remember the exact words because there are a couple of experiences similar to this that happen to other people, but it's something to the effect of, "We are watching you. We're watching you, and you're not really welcome here." And this guy is speaking this stuff, and within a couple of minutes, he sort of bounces out of it. He was in a trance. It had taken over his brain, and he bounces out of it. He was disoriented for a while. When they went back to the trailer to spend the night, he had terrible nightmares and dreams, and it stuck with him, I guess, for a couple of days. But that really happened, and if you can, make guesses about who it happened to, I'm not going to say it either way, but, I mean, it's a guy who's worked for major think tanks and labs and the U.S. military, and he's a brilliant guy, and he didn't make it up. That was one disturbing experience, but some of the other ones that happened later were worse. I mentioned about these commando types. This happened during the Bass period, and I don't know if it's too soon to get into that or you want to wait.
Well, we've got a couple of minutes before the break, so I think we have time to introduce that. In that, there were several stages of the investigation. So if I'm wrong, and you could correct me, but it began with Bigelow and his National Institute of Discovery Sciences, correct?
Yes. Bob Bigelow funded that study. He created NIDS. He paid for the scientists. He hired them. He hired vets and trackers and physicists and biologists and a lot of other folks. And then he had people like Dr. John Alexander, who were part of the team, visited the property, and then a science advisory board as well. They would fly up. They'd stay for days at a time, fly back. And they had hired local people as well, former cops. They had connections with the Ute tribe. That was all funded by Bob Bigelow. And that continued through about 2003 when I was allowed to write the first articles. The activity had gone underground. There wasn't enough for the team to do. There weren't enough paranormal incidents. So basically they gave up. I mean, the phenomena had made it clear that it was not going to cooperate. It had destroyed some cameras. It was just not playing ball. So that's when they stopped basically with the study. So, and then after that, after the book came out in 2005, then they had personnel on the property, security personnel, but not scientists anymore. There just wasn't enough to do, and NIDS went away. So for a couple of years, it was basically fallow. And then in 2007, a guy from the DIA reached out to Bob Bigelow and said, "I just read this book about Skinwalker Ranch. I'm really interested in it. Can I go?" And Bob Bigelow said, "Yeah, fly to Las Vegas. I'll take you out there." They did. The guy sort of got the idea that what is associated with UFOs might actually be a much broader perspective of paranormal phenomena, that UFOs are not in an end to themselves, that it represents the tip of the iceberg, and he wanted to take a look. And he wasn't there 5 minutes, and he had an experience. And it was meant to be tailored just for him. It was in an angle inside a building, inside the home there, that this thing appeared to him, and he was trying to play it cool and not let everybody else know it was there.
Well, let's hold this for a second. We've got to go to break, so we'll be right back. For those of you listening on KGRA, you'll hear a commercial break. For the rest of you, you'll hear a short musical interlude, and then we'll be right back into this incredible story from George Knapp. welcome back. You're listening to Open Minds UFO Radio. I'm your host, Alejandro Rojas, and we are here with George Knapp. And I mean, what you shared just now, I was not aware of, and this is really fascinating, is that, you know, this guy from the DIA in 2007, right, came to visit the ranch, and you were explaining he had his own kind of customized paranormal experience.
Yeah, this guy he's a very serious, rock-solid, brilliant guy who had read the book and thought there might be something there of interest to the DIA and the Pentagon and national security. So he called up Bigelow, said, "Can we go?" Bigelow had him fly out to Las Vegas. They flew to the ranch, and this guy had his experience within 5 minutes of getting on the property. He's in the main ranch house, hearing some stories from the caretakers who live there, and this thing appeared inside the house in broad daylight. And I'm not going to get into details about what it was, but it was pretty distinct and remarkable, and it made a very big impression on this guy. So he leaves, he tells Bigelow about it later, and he goes back to Washington, and he looks up Harry Reid, who at the time was the Senate Majority Leader. They'd had some interactions on national security issues already, told him about his experience and said, "We need to study this. That place is unique." And Reid went to some of his colleagues, the story that I've told on the air a couple of times, some of his colleagues in the Senate. He made the argument that UFOs deserve to be studied, that there could be direct national security implications, that by ignoring them, it didn't make them go away. It just made them more enigmatic, and they agreed. So they set up a program that initially was OSAP. It was separate from ATIP, the program that Lou Elizondo was involved with. He wasn't involved with it actually for another year, but ATIP was the study of occasional encounters that military personnel had with UFOs. And it was an informal organization that existed within the Pentagon, different departments and different divisions of the military, and they would exchange information. Videos would come in, they'd do analysis and create files and try to figure this stuff out. OSAP was created to be something else entirely. It was to look at a much broader range of paranormal activity. The DIA guy and Bob Bigelow and Colin Kelleher and everyone associated with NIDS knew that UFOs do, in fact, occur in connection with other strange stuff. That as much as ufologists don't like to admit it, there's a Bigfoot connection, and there is a crop circle connection, and there's a connection to animal mutilations. It's not clear what the connections were other than proximity in the same time and place of all those different phenomena. And here you had a ranch where all of this stuff was going on, and that ranch, whatever is there, had in essence given that guy from the DIA an engraved invitation to come back, and he did. And so the study was launched. Harry Reid secured the funding. They put out bids on the military websites for other contractors to submit bids. I only know of one other entity that tried to compete for the contract. Bigelow created BASS, Bigelow Advanced Aerospace Systems, and that was a separate organization housed within Bigelow Aerospace that got the contract and launched this study. And it's an amazing study. A big part of the focus was the ranch. That's not the only part of the focus. I mean, they cast a very wide net, had teams collecting information from all over the world, from foreign governments. They had teams that were zipping around. As you mentioned earlier in the program, they arranged to have an arrangement with MUFON, and I'm sure they may have had arrangements with other UFO organizations and researchers as well. Bob Bigelow, a week after he signed the contract for BASS to deal with OSAP, he came on Coast to Coast with me. And he dropped some really big hints to anyone who was paying attention. He basically said it. He dropped great big glowing breadcrumbs about what he was up to. He said, "Look, I've launched this new organization. It's going to cast a very wide net, study UFOs and related phenomena, and I have an unnamed partner. I have a partner in this. I can't tell you who it is, but they're providing financial support." And everybody just kind of ignored that. But there it was.
That's really funny. Yeah. And that's what's really weird about this is reflecting upon that time. And you've had me on Coast and we talked a little bit about this before, but now that you mention it, I remember that interview, and I knew, because I didn't sign the NDA, but I knew there was some sort of partnership that I was not going to be able to disclose, and that's why I didn't want to know. But I was like, I don't want to know. I don't want to know. So that was my attitude at the time. But you're right. Nobody caught on, and that's what's one interesting thing about all this is that all of us are looking for the government program that's looking into UFOs or out there, and none of us knew. I mean, at least in the UFO community, even some of the people who work with Bigelow, nobody knew about this relationship.
Well, I did. And again, It's the same thing. The same deal is that I'm allowed to know about it. I just can't talk about it. And I suppose if OSAP had still existed, if somebody hadn't sabotaged it and taken the money away, it would still be ongoing. I wish it were, because they did some amazing things. The world isn't going to know about it for a while, and I don't know when or if that information will come out, but they did some really amazing things, and it was definitely making progress, and it's a terrible shame that it went away. But if they were continuing to do the work that they were doing during that time period, I wouldn't be here talking about it. I would still be keeping my word. I kept my word for almost 10 years until the story came out. And as I've mentioned before, is that when the New York Times, when I'm told late last year, the New York Times is on this, they're going to break this story, I was sort of miffed about it. I said, well, why don't I get to break the story? I'm the guy who kept this secret for 9 or 10 years. I'm not a paid employee of Bigelow. I have no financial relationship with Bigelow. I know people snipe at that all the time, but that is not the case. I didn't work for him, and I didn't sign an NDA. But my word was my bond, and so I kept it. And I wanted to do the story. I don't want the New York Times to break it. I want to break it. And they had to sort of kind of gently let me know in a non-offensive way that I am not the New York Times. Well, of course I know that. I knew that the New York Times was a much better idea. There was some risk. They had told people, if anybody else leaks this story, if it breaks somewhere else, we're not going to go with it. We'll bury it. And that would have been a bad thing, because the New York Times covering it, front page story, changes the whole media environment. It meant that the Washington Post then covered it, and Fox News has been doing ongoing coverage, and many other news outlets who otherwise wouldn't come near it suddenly took it seriously. And suddenly it's not as crazy to be considering that UFOs deserve to be studied. And so I'm glad I made the decision, and I figured, well, New York Times will have some of it, but they're not going to have all of it, because I'm not saying I know more about UFOs than any journalist, and I certainly do not believe that. But I knew more than any journalist about this particular program, and I knew that I'd be able to have plenty of stories that I could break on my own, and I did.
Right. You have been, and I'm sure you will continue to. And one of the stories that you broke was along the lines of what you had just explained, but I just want to kind of get back to for a second, is you broke the story that Harry Reid had heard from this third party about, all of these things, and that's what inspired him to fund and champion this OSAP program. But there's been a lot of assumption that, Reid and Bigelow were friends, and that Bigelow had relayed what he was up to. Did Bigelow tell him, as far as you know, anything about the ranch before Reid heard from this other person in the DIA?
Yes, but it wasn't lobbying. Bigelow wasn't lobbying Harry Reid for a program. Harry Reid actually represented Robert Bigelow when they were both young men in a legal matter involving the deaths of Bob's grandparents. But they lost contact. They didn't stay in contact until MIDS was created. And I had remained in contact with Harry Reid. I always had a good relationship with him, even though I did stories that whacked him around now and then, because I'm a journalist and he was Nevada's senior senator. So I knew he had an interest in UFOs, because in 1989, after I first met with Bob Lazar and started digging into Area 51, Harry Reid was the first person I went to tell about it outside of our newsroom. I thought, somebody's got to know about this. I want to see if he's aware of this, because he had been a supporter of Nellis Air Force Base. I knew he had an interest in Area 51, not UFOs so much, but national security programs out there, and I told him about it. We were in a limo on the way to the airport as he was flying back to Washington. He says, that's really interesting. He didn't kick me out of the car. So after that, we maintained a dialogue, a sort of secret back-channel dialogue about UFOs. I would send him things from time to time that I thought would interest him, and he would send me stuff. The Congressional Research Service had prepared a report for members of Congress on the UFO issue. I'd never seen it. It had never been made public. It has since been made public, but he assured that with me, and then I would fly back to Washington, or he would come out to Las Vegas, and whenever I would see him, whatever the topic was, the official topic or the reason for it, we would go off to the side and have a separate conversation about UFO matters. And it drove his staff crazy because he wouldn't tell them what we were talking about, and it alarmed them, and I wouldn't tell them what we were talking about, and they used to ask, too. And then in 95, after Bigelow had set up NIDS, I told Harry Reid about it. I said, look, this Science Advisory Board is pretty amazing. I had been allowed to sit in on a couple of meetings. I interacted with the staff. I even made a presentation to them one time about the Russia UFO files that I brought back. It's an amazing group of people, PhDs all around, brilliant people, many of whom did not want their names used. There were 2 astronauts. I mean, you can guess who one of them was, Edgar Mitchell, Hal Puthoff, and Kit Green, and John Alexander, and people like that who were, willing to put their reputations and their careers on the line to investigate this stuff. So I told Reid about it. He said, you think I could get sit in on some of those? I said, I'm sure you could. So he did. I don't know how many of those meetings he sat in on, but there were a couple. And then it sort of went away. I mean, NIDS went on its way. Harry Reid's back to Washington, and there was no real ongoing contact between them. Occasionally, Bob Bigelow would donate to Harry Reid's re-election campaigns, which now, people looking to nitpick and to somehow destroy the credibility of this story, I can tell you they're full of baloney. Bob Bigelow was a businessman operating in Las Vegas. Harry Reid was the senior senator and the most powerful Nevadan ever elected sent to Washington. Yes, Bob Bigelow did donate money to Harry Reid's campaign. Small, tiny amounts compared to the size of the modern election campaigns, but still it's enough that somebody, if they want to denigrate the whole relationship, they can point to it and say, aha, it's a quid pro quo. Well, that's baloney. It wasn't. In 2007, so there had been periodic contact, and Bigelow and Reid both respected each other and both understood that their mutual interests. But Reid had read the Skinwalker book. He was intrigued by it. I think he had some conversations with Bob about it. So he was aware of the ranch, but until that DIA guy came to him, there had been no proposal from anyone for any kind of federally funded, Pentagon-funded research program involving Bigelow Aerospace.
Mm-hmm. Now, when it comes to OSAP, another thing that you broke, a story you broke, and I always tell people, if you want the latest breaking on all of this, you got to go to KLAS and the I-Team. But is how and why it ended, because I think, that's a really interesting story as well.
Well, it is, and the full thing has not been told, and I'm not sure. I can tell part of it because I already have shared with you some of the details, but it's a multi-level bit of intrigue in how the Pentagon works and how contracts work. In essence, though, opposition grew to the OSAP program. It was interacting with Elizondo and ATIP. There was exchange of information back and forth, and those 2 programs were separate for a while, but they were cooperative, and it alarmed some people in the Pentagon, who, in particular, there's a cabal in there. Nick Redfern had written about him. I forget what his name for him was. I don't think that's the real name, but they're basically high-level people in different intelligence agencies who are fundamentalist Christians, who think that anything involving UFOs and the paranormal is satanic, that by studying it, we invite Satan into this world, and they wanted it killed for those reasons. Now, I know how that sounds. I'm not belittling anybody's religious beliefs, but man, that kind of a decision-making, deciding to kill a program that's doing good work because Satan might be involved, I don't feel better about the Pentagon when I hear that, but it's true. Now, there were other factors involved. There was political intrigue there at the Pentagon. Somebody sees a pile of money that they consider vulnerable. They will go after it just for other reasons. And so the money was pulled out from under it. I'll tell you this. Bob Bigelow continued to fund it for a year on his own, out of his own pocket. He had, I think it was 50, it might have been as many as 90 employees at one time, but at least 50 of these were serious staff member investigator types who were boots on the ground, collecting files, investigating reports, really doing solid research. In addition to that, you had Hal Puthoff overseeing the creation, writing of scientific papers. And several of those have now gone public. I made the list public earlier this year, the full list and their authors, and that was some solid work that was well received in aerospace circles and industry circles and at the Pentagon. People who saw those papers thought, wow, this is great. It's looking down the road 50 years to what science and engineering and aerospace could be, and space travel. Exciting stuff. But it got yanked. Bigelow continued to fund it for a year, fought his damnedest to keep it alive, but in the end it got sunk. And it's a shame. It's a shame. And then whatever was left of OSAP sort of merged back into ATIP. So the New York Times breaks the story in December. They are true. There was a program called ATIP. It did study UFOs, but the $22 million didn't go to ATIP. It went to OSAP. It went to Bigelow Aerospace.
Mm-hmm. And some other intrigue, which I think I find interesting, and there's so much, because it is complicated, about this story that people don't seem to get, but I have confirmed this with Leslie Kane, and she did let me know it's okay to say, but the New York Times had other sources than Elizondo or To the Stars or some of the other fast people, and I don't think I think everybody assumes that it was Bigelow and his group that gave her that information for the New York Times story. But there's more political intrigue in that there's other sources we're not aware of.
That's true. I mean, the primary instigator of that whole thing, the New York Times story, is Tom DeLonge. I know that drives some people crazy, but the fact is he deserves credit for what he did. He put together this group of people, and they developed the plan, and he sold it. And, one way to get it off the ground, I mean, by creating the organization To the Stars, he gave Lou Elizondo a place to go. If Lou Elizondo didn't have a place to go, he might have stayed in the Pentagon and wallowed there, and we would never have seen this stuff. Now, Lou did start the process forward on a number of videos being released, and he went by the book. There's a paper trail, and I've seen it, at least for the first three. I remember the first time I met Lou was 2 days after he stepped on stage with Tom in Seattle, and then after that he came to Las Vegas, and I got to have dinner with he and Tom and Mr. B, and he had those videos. Are there more? Oh yeah, there's more. It's in the process. So I think after he left, whoever was left over was ticked off that he had made this stuff public, and he had a lot of people who were really mad at him, who were surprised when he made that announcement. I think they may have turned off the spigot. So I don't know if we'll ever see more videos, but he at least started the process. But the fact is, ETSA, DeLonge and his crew, are the ones who got the attention of the New York Times, showed them enough information to verify what they had heard from other sources. And I think they probably would have shared those videos, except the New York Times got them on their own. They got them from somewhere else. And that is why, to the consternation, I think, of Tom and his crew, New York Times breaks the story, and they don't even give Tom DeLonge or TGSA a mention. They don't give them any credit at all. But, at the time, they were launching their organization. They wanted to raise money. They wanted a higher profile, and they kind of got burned by it. I think it created some bad feelings. Leslie Kane did amazing work. I mean, she was the rock on that story in shepherding it, because, she's not a staff member of the New York Times, but she knew more about UFOs than anyone who was there. And I think if she had had her way, they would have written more stories. But after they made the big splash, they didn't. They stopped.
Yeah. Yeah, and I so agree with Tom DeLonge needing to be recognized, and I certainly have been an angle with everything that I've done, including my talk out here. But we're running out of time, so I guess to pull it back and to get intrigue into this documentary, which is, I mean, I feel that this documentary is very important, and I'm sure you do too, because finally, the information is getting out in the format which you had hoped it get out at the beginning, and it seems to be doing well.
Yeah, it was doing really well. I didn't check today, but I know in the first day that it went public, it was for a time the number one documentary on iTunes, number one in the world. And I think the last word I heard from Jeremy Corbell, the director, it was on iTunes number 18, not documentaries, all films on iTunes. The top 200 films in the world, it was number 18, which is a pretty amazing thing. I mean, and it's just getting started. It's only been out for 2 days, and so there's a bigger audience that, the UFO people and the paranormal people have been waiting to see it for a long time, so they're the ones who jumped on it. But there's a whole big audience out there that is wondering, what the heck is this Skinwalker thing that popped up on this list? And I think there's a chance we could finally reach the broader audience that needs to be aware of this. It may be too rudimentary and too basic for some UFO poobahs, but the fact is, this is not meant for them. It's meant for a much bigger audience that I wanted to engage and to realize these issues involve all of us. I'm not talking about some alien invasion or something, but the nature of reality and understanding our place in the universe and our spot in the food chain. We need to think about this stuff, and I think we made a breakthrough. I am frustrated because after 18 years or so of trips out there, there's a lot of stuff to report, and we had to leave so much out, of the original material, as well as new things that we've shot that Jeremy and Matt and I have collected, and witnesses we've interviewed, and fairly recent phenomena, including the new owner and his team. There's a lot to tell. So I'm hoping that it is successful enough that we can tell it more. And I'd like to include the stories of some of the individual researchers who have been drawn to that place on their own and have had their own adventures. And I know we're taking a lot of shots from ufologists who, for one reason or another, are ticked off to be on the outside looking in. But too bad. That's the way it goes.
Right. I mean, I feel that way, too, in that you could be excited about great information coming out, or you could be upset because you're not involved, which is,
yeah,
I don't know. It's frustrating to hear those people have these issues. But I guess my last question will be, to that larger population that seems to be out there, larger than I think many of us suspect that is out there and has a stronger influence than we maybe would have expected. And what I mean is the religious faction, the people who have concerns that we're, dealing with demons. What would you say to people who said, maybe they should have shut that down? I kind of agree with those people. How would you argue that your point with them?
Well, here are the facts. People can dispute lights in the sky or, mistaken identification of different phenomena, and we know that 95% of UFO cases, for example, are probably explainable. But the fact is, our government has now confirmed, there's no question about it, these are real. They're from somewhere else. They're not ours. And if we don't figure it out, somebody else can figure it out. So even if you're not interested in the cosmic questions of who are they, how do they relate to us? What's their interest? Why are they here? How do we fit into this? Even if you don't relate to that, which I can't imagine any human being who would not, there's national security issues to consider. There's sometimes direct personal safety issues to consider. These things are physical. They've demonstrated a physical reality. They take different forms, different shapes, different times. It's real, and we need to figure it out. If the Russians or Chinese figure it out, you can bet that they will exploit it. And I think maybe that they have made progress. Harry Reid thinks they've made progress. And Lou Elizondo believes that there are programs. I believe and have been told that during the Bass study, there were foreign governments in the Uinta Basin that were sniffing around. I wanted to know what was going on out there. Now, that's serious. So when somebody uses mumbo-jumbo and spooky stories and religious beliefs to put the kibosh on a scientific study or a legitimate inquiry, that's troublesome. You know what? Maybe it is Satan. Maybe it's demons. I don't know what it is. Interdimensional travels, extra-dimensional people, time travelers, all of the above. Or crypto-terrestrials or ultra-terrestrials. I don't know. But we need to figure it out. If not for national security or personal safety, just for the sheer joy of discovery. And so it's very bad national security policy to say we don't want to know about something. That makes no sense at all.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much. We're out of time. This is absolutely fascinating, and I am just so rooting for this film. I hope it goes very big, and I'm sure that you're going to have some more stories to break regarding all of this in the near future.
Oh, I think there's a pretty good chance of that.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Alejandro. See you later.
Thank you so much to George Knapp for being on the show. I thought that was some pretty amazing information. So I'm really happy that George was able to join me. That gets to be hard to do. He's such a busy person. And, like me, especially him, he's busy all day. Output is what he's thinking. He's got to get new stories, new information to get out. And that keeps him really busy. And that's what we want him to be doing. So he's out there getting out so much information, and so happy he could take the time to share some of these great stories with us. Martin and I talked about a lot of news at the beginning of the show. And of course, you can get that at openminds.tv. Also, of course, we've got lots of great products at ufocongress.com. So check that out. And soon here we'll have more information about the upcoming event coming up in a year now. So that's going to be a ton of fun. And it's going to be probably, well, I say this every year, but every year we have some really cool stuff. So we're going to have some really, really cool stuff at the Congress. But also, when it comes to the T-shirts, a lot of those T-shirts are selling out because we only have limited amounts. So everything's going very quickly. Luckily, we have merchandise that's cooler than what we've had in the past, I think, or at least more of it. And so people are buying it up. So if there's a favorite design you have, be sure and go to the website and get that. Don't rest on your laurels. But you can also email us, too, and let us know if there's one you like that's not in stock. And we can let you know if we're planning on doing that design again. Otherwise, Open Minds, the YouTube page, we've got lots of really cool updated stuff there. So, of course, we have our live streams that are happening every Thursday evening. I'm also posting these podcasts up on YouTube. And we'll have these great interviews from the Devil's Tower with the Devil's Tower in the background of David Marler, Mark D'Antonio, Lee Spiegel, myself, and Micah Hanks. So lots of cool topics, and that's going to be a lot of fun too. So keep an eye on that. And you can go to my Patreon, like I talked about before, and keep up to speed on everything I'm doing. So not just my Open Mind stuff, but Den of Geek and anything else that may be coming out. So thank you all so much for listening. Thank you to Martin Willis of Podcast UFO for joining us with the news. Thank you for Systematics for doing the bumper music. And thank you to Micah's brother Caleb for doing the awesome open and closed music. Sometimes people say, where can I get that cool music, man? Well, if you go to Open Minds Radio page, you'll have a link to where you can go download that. He makes it mostly available for free. You can actually find him via the Clerk Chronicles on Patreon as well, and you can donate to him and find more material there. So Caleb's extremely talented. But finally, thank you to you, the listeners, for being here once again. We'll have another great show next week. Until next time, adios, muchachos.